Um, but I've got a few items here. I'll just update folks. I always try and start out with some of the latest news. So I just saw that there's a new 200 megawatt project in northern Indiana, which I thought was kind of interesting. The utility of that area is called NIPSCO, which is Northern Indiana Public Service Company, and they've committed to be coal-free by 2028, which is pretty dramatic considering we're in the heart here of coal country. So that's a big deal. When I was going through all the news for solar this particular week, there's just one after another of these big projects that's being announced. 200 megabytes here and our megawatts, not megabytes. I keep talking computers, but then they'll have a bunch in California, New York, Michigan. So it's pretty amazing that utility scale is growing so dramatically. For people who work with Enphase microinverters, they just announced that they've got a 24/7 customer support now. So they're doing 24 hours, 7 days a week. So that's kind of interesting. So you don't have to, before it was always like calling them 9 to 4 Pacific time or whatever. So that's good. Apparently they're looking at themselves more as a global company. So that's good. New Mexico on April 5th just announced that they just enacted community solar legislation. So they're the 21st state in the country now with community solar mandates. So for those of you who aren't that familiar with what community solar is, that basically just means a shared array, essentially, and you've got to have the cooperation of the utility company to divvy up your portion of the array with your bill. And a lot of the utility companies are not all that fond of doing that. So now New Mexico has stepped in and said, okay, if you want to operate in our region, you have to deal with community solar. So now there are 21 states that are doing that. So it's clearly a wave of the future, except in Ohio, of course, where you'll see we're still walking backwards, I think. This is interesting, Don. We were talking about this last time with storage, and if it's part of the ITC. I did look up, and storage is definitely part of the investment tax credit, but only if it is installed with solar.
Right.
So that's current.
That's right.
But there is a bipartisan effort going on in Congress right now to extend the ITC to battery only. So if you're a utility and you want to install just a storage
battery bank for anything?
Yeah.
Just a battery bank for anything.
I assume it has to deal with energy in some way.
Well, yeah, but it's got that. But I mean, it's just a battery bank that's just they're encouraging people to develop the battery industry and that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, they're looking at batteries like you would look at a peaker plant, like a gas-powered peaker plant. So a lot of these utilities are looking at storage to say, okay, I'm just going to put in a battery bank. I'm going to be able to store energy when it's abundant and then sell it when it's less abundant and make money off of it. That's kind of what you're looking at. And so they're just saying, okay, well, that qualifies. And so that's interesting. They're also using battery plants as power cleaning devices. So if you figure, if you think about it, you're bringing AC power in with all of its variations, its transients, its harmonic distortions, and then it's converted to DC. Then when it's rebroadcast, it's clean per se. So they use them as kind of a wash on the grid. They're also used in transport lines. So if you're taking it from one location, say you want to go from Iowa's wind farms to New York City, you would take the AC current, turn it into high-powered DC current, send it off, but then it has to be reconverted back into AC at its destination. So you could do that through through a battery bank. Simply charge the battery bank and then rebroadcast it out. So there's a lot of use for it. It's looking to be the next big wave in solar. So I think what we may find, because there's such a rush to do these utility scale systems, we may find ourselves dealing with an overproduction of solar. We see this in California with overproduction of solar. We see it with wind in West Texas. They've overproduced wind. So they have to curtail it at different times because there's just simply no demand for it. Batteries are a good example of something that if it is curtailed, you can store that instead of just shutting down your system. So, but who knows? People always seem to overshoot the mark when we didn't have enough, then we have too much, then, we have to figure out what to do with it. The Ohio law, yeah, Don?
It's the market. It'll work out.
Yeah, eventually. But my dad was an economist, and he always used to say, in the long term, we're all dead.
All dead, yeah.
So, so short term is kind of all you're worried about, really. But
very true.
Ohio law, that township thing is still moving forward. So that was basically a law that's been proposed that any township, if there's a popular referendum, you can do a petition and stop a wind or solar development in its tracks by getting the signatures to essentially have a referendum on whether they want to have it or not. And to my way of reading it, it's they're arguing it's local control and we should have local control and this is power to the people. Of course, they also invoke eminent domain on gas fracking, so you don't have much local control if your neighbors decide they're going to frack under your property. Same with pipelines, same with roads, same with telephone poles, same with everything, But it's really kind of a cynical attempt to say, if you don't want wind or solar developed, we can get 35 people in a township to stop you. So the uncertainty of these projects then make the projects less attractive. If
Jay, does that?
Yeah.
Does that? I'm just curious. Does that stop them, or does that just make it go to a vote? I don't know the answer. I'm just.
It makes it go to a vote, but it stops it for as much as a year or two until the vote is scheduled.
Yeah.
So,
is 35 a lower threshold than other referendums, or is that the standard?
No, I use 35 as an example because many townships don't have very many people. But bear in mind, the development has already gone through the Ohio Public Utility Siting Board, gotten approval from the Siting Board, then gotten approval from the Public Utility Commission, and then got the go-ahead for all of the easements and all of the activities, and then a petition, and I forget the exact number, but it's like 15% of the voters can step in and say, no, we want to stop this. And then it stops.
That makes sense. It would be more fair if they raised an issue before you did all the work. That makes,
or
give them the ability.
Or applied the dynamic to every single development. If this were a standard thing, for every shopping mall that's developed, for every highway, for everything, but it's not. It's specifically targeted towards renewable energy, and clearly is a backdoor way of saying we want to put pressure on this. Or if I'm really being cynical, probably more just a way for these two guys who introduced it to get a lot of campaign contributions to.
You're going to say that the big oil did it.
No. I'm saying these guys want some money from renewables. I think renewables haven't paid off congressmen the way they should. It's
Well,
sort of like when the
they
US
don't have to.
Congress,
Congress is going to pay them off. The
pardon?
Congress is paying them. The Congress is paying them off. The dynamic is reversed.
That's, well, I don't know. But you remember when Microsoft was sued by the federal government as an antitrust thing because
Yep.
of Windows Explorer? And there were all these hearings, and then Microsoft announced that they would begin to give $400 million a year in donations to political parties, and it all
Hmm.
went away. It was really just a political shakedown to say, you're not contributing, man. You got to pay to play in this country, and
Hmm.
renewables have to step up to the plate. I mean, shoot, that's the way you do business in America. Is you got to pay to play. So
They haven't talked to the teachers unions. When Congress sends you money, you're supposed to kick it back to them, at least a piece of it.
yeah,
They haven't
yeah,
figured that part out yet.
it's I don't know, a consultancy fee. Who knows? Who
Hmm.
knows how we do this? Although I was just listening to a session on the controversy in Ohio around Senate Bill 6, which was basically talking about corruption. The First Energy, giving 600 or $60 million to the state legislature and getting a couple of $1 billion in basically tax funded um, subsidies.
Hmm.
And they've arrested the Speaker of the House, Larry Householder, and all of that. But the head of the Public Utility Commission, the FBI actually raided his house and took away everything. He apparently was a paid consultant to First Energy while serving as the chairman of the Public Utility Commission, ruling in First Energy's favor for these subsidies. And part of that ruling was that there would be no financial disclosure of, First Energy is saying we need this money because we're in financial trouble, but they were not required to say in what way they were in any financial trouble, nor ever report what they did with the money. So that's a sweet little deal. So anyway, corruption runs amok. Speaking of which, apparently in 2016 in Michigan, the legislature passed a law capping renewable energy at 1% within utilities districts. There's a move there to repeal that, largely, I think, on part of the utilities, because they're finding, that renewables are cheaper. And so what they were trying to do before was stop the development of renewables, but now they want to actually develop renewables. So they're having to repeal that law. So those were some of the items I found in the news there. Before I had another thing I thought I'd talk about is some of the innovations in solar panel technology that's going on. But does anybody have a specific question on solar related issues? I think Don, you often come in with some sort of um,
I
political.
can tell you all about your corruption issues in Chicago. I just got off an hour-long call for a solar farm we're building, and this county of Cook in our favorite city of Chicago is alive and well.
Oh boy, yeah, that
But
was.
that can't be disclosed in public. So yeah.
I remember back when I was in telecom, Cook County was the only county in the country that required all telecommunications cabling to be in conduit. And
Hmm.
it was because of the pipe fitters union, in Cook County basically said, hey, we want the work. And
Hmm.
and the
Yeah.
fact that it isn't necessary is completely irrelevant as far as we're
Relevant. Yep.
concerned. So
Yep.
so
The
that
state of
was
Illinois gives you a tax break for property taxes down a 10% valuation if you put in a solar farm. And then the only county in the state that has an equalization factor, which means that they take the 10% and multiply it by 3, so you really only get down to 30%. So that they get the extra, Cook County gets 20% more than any other county in the state.
You mean they give you an additional 20%
Well,
reduction in your property value, or
no. So your
they,
property's worth $100. Your property's worth $100. If you put a solar farm on it, they'll assess it at 10% of that. So the $100 property goes down to $100,000. I'm sorry, the $100,000 property goes down to 10 or whatever it is. Yeah.
gotcha.
But in Cook County, they have a special rule that nobody's sure how they did it, but the special rule is that 10% gets multiplied by 3. So you're paying tax on 300 instead of on 100.
So they're basically, the
The
idea
state
was to incentivize the development of solar, and they're saying, okay, but we want 3 times as much tax as anywhere else.
The state giveth, the county taketh away at least,
Yeah.
several, 20% of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, we had something, I don't know why that just cheated in my mind, but during the fracking boom, when people were going around and offering money in this region for mineral rights, the county jacked up all of our property assessment based on the added value of the mineral rights of your property, except they didn't check to see if you ever even owned your mineral rights. And then when the value went back down, they never changed the adjustment, because for a while, companies were paying like $6,000 an acre for fracking rights. And then it dropped down to about $100. But the equalization or the adjustment only goes one way. It doesn't actually go the other way.
I believe it's incumbent upon you in Ohio every 3 years, the triennials, to go in there and if you dispute what the property is, you have your right to go in there and talk to them.
You do, yes. But they still have our house classified as a shed, so I'm not willing to go in and argue with them.
You're not going to go talk to them at all?
No. So the property may be very expensive, but the house is not. So we're just going to ignore that for as long as they'll ignore us, we'll ignore them. So
that's the way it works sometimes.
I know. Stay off their radar. So let me tell you a couple of things. I was reading some articles about solar panel innovation, and I've been hearing these things. I'm in this mood where I'm listening to podcasts all the time now about solar stuff, which of course drives my wife crazy, but I find them very fascinating, especially at the utility level, because that's not something I was very versed in. So, but some of the new things that are really getting a lot of attention are what they refer to as photovoltaics, which is floating solar arrays. And they're looking at it for a couple of reasons. And to me, I was thinking, well, what's the point of that? I mean, there's plenty of land, but apparently there's not plenty of land everywhere. But they're also looking at doing this in conjunction with hydro reservoirs, because they already have the transmission lines right there at the hydro facility. The water is considered lost space. The reservoir is taking up space that's not developed. Sure, some people go fishing or boating or whatever, but not enough, to really justify the space that's consumed. And the cooling effect of the water will produce about 10% more from the solar panels. So there's obviously increased cost in putting in a floating system, but the production may offset some of that cost. So this is one of those things. It's not really for ocean, because obviously tidal and the rough weather and things like that, but for calm waters, reservoirs, lakes, places of that nature, photovoltaics is the next big fad. Whether it becomes as big as they think, who knows?
Just like at Lake Mead, they're going to put in a whole bunch of solar panels in the center. And I guess they can't go all the way to the edges, because if the water goes down, then all of a sudden your solar panels are stuck on the shore.
You would think. I suspect these things are tethered in some way, so you can probably even move them if you had to. Just release the tether and anchor them in another point. But yeah, Lake Mead or Lake Cumberland in Kentucky, or any of the reservoirs that are out there for, throughout the Tennessee Valley, throughout
I
the
don't think the
Cascades.
skiers and the boaters would like Cumberland or some of those you're picking. That Lake Cumberland is pretty active, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean
and
that's
it's narrow. It's fairly
yeah.
narrow, and there are crazy people in their boats there, because I've been on Lake
Oh yeah.
Cumberland, and they probably go right into the array and smash into it.
Mhm.
Building integrated solar, or BIPV, is another thing people are focusing on quite a lot. There you're talking about solar awnings, solar carports, vertical panels, vertical going up the side of a building. As the panels get cheaper and cheaper, the orientation becomes less and less important. You don't have to maximize your return on every panel when you can just throw a bunch more panels up there at relatively little cost. So
Have
building
they got the
integrated,
shingles yet?
pardon?
Have they got the shingles yet? They keep talking about how they're going to have the painted on shingles for the solar.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of those technologies I think is a solution in search of a problem. It's so expensive. You've got to put in dummy shingles. You've got wiring management issues. You've got lots of different problems. If you had a faulty panel or whatever, you've got to pull up your shingles. Is that really practical?
Mm-hmm.
So typically those solar shingles are addressing aesthetic issues primarily, and there are a lot better ways of addressing aesthetic issues than solar shingles. I know Tesla has their thing that they're always touting, but they've been touting it for 6 or 7 years now, and really have had no successful launch. They've had a couple of demonstration projects, but they're super expensive too. But there is another alternative called solar skins, and that's a better alternative than solar shingles. Essentially, they're using the same technology, like when you see those big wraparound buses with posters on the outside,
Mm-hmm.
but if you sit inside, you're just looking out the window. You don't realize there's a billboard of some movie or whatever. Well, that technology is being put over top of the solar panels, so that they're essentially, you could get the shingle pattern on your solar array and it will disappear on your roof if you wanted to do that. So visually it goes away, even though you're just setting traditional panels there. Or you could use them for advertising if you wanted to, or company logos, or who knows what you want to do with that. But that is a technology that's gaining a lot. And I saw that the added cost is only about 10%.
Are you saying you just put normal panels on your roof and then put this wrap over top of it to make it look like a shingle roof or something?
Yeah,
Is that what?
each panel is laminated. I don't
Mhm.
quite know how the process is, whether it's individually glued on the panel or whether it stretches
Mhm.
or whatever. It's got to be easily removed for these buses because they change them periodically. But yeah,
Mhm.
it's a layer, it's an image that's placed on the panel. And
Okay.
you would just set the panel there. And that image could emulate the pattern and color of your shingles, so that visually they they disappear effectively. I suspect if you look at it closely, you'll see that there's something there,
Yeah.
but at quick glance, you wouldn't even notice it. But they cost about 10% more, and there is a reduction of about 15% of their efficiency. Um,
Mhm.
Not going from 18% to 3%, but if you're at 18%, you lose, 3%. So you're down to
Mhm.
about 15%. So a little bit of efficiency loss, because clearly you're covering it with something, and
Mhm.
a little bit more cost. But it's a fairly new technology, and I'm sure those costs would come down. There's another similar product out there that's getting a lot of traction, solar fabrics. And these are a thin film technology. They're looking at using them for awnings, for tents. Like if you were having a big flea market or something, you could just set up this tent and have power coming from the system. They're using it in military operations. It's easily installed, easily taken down. Obviously less efficient than a silicon-based solar, but it has a lot of mobility, a lot of flexibility issues. So that's something we should start looking for. Periodically, they bring this out and they say, "Oh, solar clothing," like that's going to be a thing. I can't see that as a practical application. Sometimes you have a little patch on a backpack and it'll charge your phone. That's fine. But why would you wear a solar sweater? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me. But there's a lot of products out there that don't make any sense to me. So who am I to judge what these
Give it
things are?
time, Jay. I mean, I'm sure there are people who said, "Who makes sense to have a stinky car when you have all these nice horses to
That's
drive around?"
true. That's true. Yeah, speaking of things that don't make any sense to me, I just heard a podcast about the person who has the most subscribers in YouTube. There's some guy, he's like a he's been doing it 10 years, a college student in Sweden who has 100 million subscribers. And he mostly just sits there and plays video games, online. I'm like, okay, I guess whatever. Makes millions and millions of dollars a year from his YouTube station.
If somebody paid me millions of dollars to play games, I guess I would too if I had to.
Yeah, but you wouldn't pay me millions to watch this guy play games. I wouldn't do it. But it's I was trying to understand why that was, and I just kind of figured that it's people. You've always wanted to hang out with the cool kids when you were in high school or whatever, and I suspect this is the cool kid. This is the guy, and you're just hanging out with him. It's like I'm sure they developed some sort of weird like relationship. Like he's my buddy. I hang with him while we play video games.
He probably has to live in an undisclosed location underground so that nobody can come find him. He's got that many.
Well,
that many.
It has gotten weird. It's gotten weird. In fact, he got into a big controversy because apparently the guy who went into the mosque in New Zealand and shot everybody and live streamed it was calling out this particular YouTuber while he was doing it, like he was his bud. So
clearly that was a very bad person, but just because the very bad person has a psychological fixation on somebody on TV like Lucy or J.R. Ewing or something doesn't make that person on TV the bad guy.
Yes, but as we know, things don't always translate in a logical manner. So
fair enough.
So this guy received some of the blowback on that. The other technology, the last one, oh no, there are two more I had besides solar fabric. One thing that had never occurred to me, I never even imagined, but they were talking about solar noise barriers. Apparently, you go around those highway systems and they erect they erect noise barriers from neighborhoods. There's apparently 3,000 miles of these noise barriers out there, and they're talking about integrating solar within these noise barriers, which, that's a lot of space, it's kind of interesting.
We talking put them on vertical or put them on top like a little panel on along the top?
I suspect vertical, but and I suspect that you could build them just using panels instead of concrete walls, so for new noise barriers, it would be obviously less expensive than just coating them. I don't know if it's a practical application to go over all this space, and
probably get dirty from the road.
You would think it, but vertical, with rain and stuff, not a big deal. And then, of course, transparent solar, which is, I think, going to be huge in the not too distant future. Essentially, we're talking solar windows, so you get high-rise buildings with every window being effectively a solar panel. The newest technology on those shows about an 8% efficiency. So converting 8% of the sunlight into power, and about a 43% transparency. So they're not clear.
What's 8%? What's the 8% compared to for a standard panel?
About 20%.
Okay.
And
currently they're taking out certain wavelengths that some are transparent, but I guess a lot of them are not. I mean, a lot of them are not visible. Is that where they're getting a lot of their power, from the upper and lower levels?
They would have to, they're shading out certain aspects like the UV, which is good anyway, because that will keep, some of the color distortion and things in your carpets. But obviously at this point, the technology is such that if you had it completely transparent, you're letting all of the light through. So they're harvesting nothing. So it has to be a bit of a tinted window. So it's better to say a semi-transparent window as opposed to a fully transparent window. But we're still in the early days of this, so it will get better.
Is there not enough power above and below the visible spectrum?
Well, that's still also experimental. I know they've been harvesting some of the infrared and some of the UV. If they can get better at that, then you can just let the visible light through and harvest, the other portions of the electromagnetic spectrum. I did see a unit. We were out at the very large antenna. I think that's what they call it, the VLA. If you ever saw, what was it, Contact with Jodie Foster? They're out there with all those big dishes, contacting alien life. It's out in New Mexico. And they had some equipment you could point up at the cosmic radiation, and it would show it generating power from the cosmic radiation, which was pretty cool, but clearly an expensive unit and not very efficient. But it at least shows in concept you can even gather electricity from that portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. So, but I think the UV will eliminate cloud cover as an issue, because UV penetrates clouds. And so right there, you don't have to worry about weather patterns as far as solar. Infrared, I don't know. Clearly, cosmic radiation you can get at night, but so I think we'll see there being a lot of research into this. I just think that's interesting. One of the criticism of solar, when people talk about solar as a be-all and end-all for the for energy needs, is that it's not very energy dense when compared with fossil fuels. So how much land it takes, how much space it takes is fairly large compared to an oil field per se for the same amount of energy produced. So that's something we're going to have to overcome. I think the best way to overcome it is to integrate solar into almost everything, as opposed to saying we're going to have solar arrays the size of Utah or whatever. I think we're going to have lots of little solar arrays the size of whatever it is that's being powered by them. Yeah, Chris.
And the other thing is too, we talk about the distributed energy grid. I mean, that's the whole thing. You need to have a high density so you can have 1,000 or 2,000 megawatt plant services a whole state or 5 counties. Whereas if everyone had their own array, you could have microgrids all over the place, and then you lose one plant. So what? You still got all the rest of them to pick it up. So yes, it may be energy dense. We'd all Well, imagine what the air would be like if we each had our own little mini gas. We're all running gas generators all the time. I mean, that doesn't exactly save anything either. So,
Right.
but
They're called cars.
Yeah.
you're right.
Well, my response to that, when people say, the space that's required, and you'll often hear people say things like, in order to power the United States, you'll need a solar array the size of New Mexico. Well, technically that's true. I always say, yeah, and if everybody in the US drove a car, we'd have to have a parking lot the size of Montana. It's like you don't put it all in one spot, I mean, yeah, we have parking spaces the size of Montana, but it's distributed, it's everywhere. So,
Yeah. If everybody just integrated into the house and it became economical to do that, that would be a very, very, push us very far ahead in where we need to go. You just can't
Sure.
make it people have to choose that. You have to sell it to them. You can't, come down and like California with a hammer on their head and say, you can't build a house without something. That's a bit much, but yeah.
Yeah. So we see that happening. And we'll also see a constant advancement of the efficiency of the panels. So that reduces the amount of space that's required. And we'll see the moving forward of community solar and of utility scale and of distributed. And then, of course, you throw in energy efficiencies and battery storage and all of these things combined, in a total solution. Bill, you had something?
Yeah, I did look at the size of an array to power the United States. And if I remember correctly, and obviously there's some assumptions there, it was 140 miles by 140 miles. It's not. And I think Elon Musk has even stated a similar metric, and you can see 140 miles from space, it's rather significant, but it's not the size of New Mexico.
Yeah.
I think that could be true.
Yeah, so I think we're moving ever closer to a target of 100% renewables. The last I saw, since I've been doing this, the original estimate I saw was like only 20% of the grid could be powered by renewables without having to make fundamental changes to the grid. Then the most recent I've seen is projecting 50% of our energy could be powered through renewables without fundamentally changing the grid. So technologies, ways of dealing with things, we get better at things as we understand these technologies. So who knows what the upper limit is? Maybe it's 70%, maybe it's 80, maybe it's 50, I don't know. But then we need to start making fundamental changes to how our grid operates. We've done that before. The idea, the reason that mandated making large generation plants and a vast network of distribution, those reasons don't exist anymore, or they're less mandatory, so I think we're going to move to using the internet analogy, where local computing power is handled locally, and then interconnection things are handled through the interconnection. And the grid becomes an over-under kind of thing and a communications system, as opposed to the primary source of your energy. It's a place you can send excess and a place you can draw from, and a place you can communicate through the Internet of Things. But you would rely on your microgrid or your local distributed system for the bulk of what you need. And now they're going to have to sell me a reason to connect. You're
going to have to get a Henry Ford out there to sell this idea, though. While it makes sense, you have to have somebody who's going to be, not a prophet, but, somebody who's going to get everybody on board, like an Elon Musk kind of guy but he's doing cars and spaceships and stuff.
Yeah. Well, there's got to be a big app. There's got to be an app that everybody wants. That's going to be something. That's going to be one of the drivers. But probably the biggest detriment to this, or the biggest inhibitor, is not technology. It's going to be government and regulatory interference. They just keep messing with stuff. There's a certain status quo protection that's required or that's built into any system. So they're going to keep throwing impediments into this as we get kicking forward, along, because they're not going to stop it. They just delay it.
Well, they eventually allowed indoor plumbing, so everything comes around sooner or later.
Yeah. Well, the example I like to talk about is the red flag law, where they were trying to protect the railroads. Yeah. So when people started driving cars, you had to walk 30 paces in front of the car, waving a red flag, telling people the car was coming. So, clearly we got beyond that. This is really why we need to start paying off legislators. I mean, I've been touting this for a long time, but it's true, man. You got to play the game. You got to go in there. So we'll see. We can become as corrupt as any of them. Come on, that's the way we have to evolve as an industry. All right. So does anybody have anything else? Any questions before we call it a day here? Oh, everybody set? All right. Well, then I'll see you all next Tuesday. All right. Thanks for joining. Take care.
That's good, Jay. Good week. Yeah.
Bye-bye.